right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending where you're joining us from. Thank you for joining us in the second session of Day One and Beyond for the calendar year 2025. In today's session, we will talk about identity and access management on OCI. My name is Kiran Thakkar, Cloud Security Architect on OCI. I help customers with security services on OCI Cloud. My partner in crime today is Chetan Soni. He will introduce himself and start the session.
Hey everyone, this is Chetan. I work in the same team as Kiran, and I would like to thank you all for joining us today. Today, we are here to explore how OCI IAM can help your organization strengthen its security posture, streamline user access, and meet compliance requirement. And while all of this, improving the user experience. In today's interconnected digital landscape, organization faces some challenges, right? So the challenges are balancing the robust security and granting seamless access to your employees and partners. Today, we have an example of a company called as Global Tech Solution, which face some challenges. So the challenges are they want to go away from their legacy identity access management system and then modernize their authentication. They want to securely access their internal and external users and also adapt some cloud native solutions. Then they would like to just go ahead and have their internal users the capability for doing their single sign-on from their corporate identity provider. And for their external vendors, they don't have any kind of an IAM solution. So they want an IAM solution which can give their vendors the MFA capabilities. And along with them, they need some kind of a centralized identity and access management solution for audit and compliance. So OCI IAM is designed to address this kind of challenges head on and then ensure that right people have access to right resources at right time. So over today's session, we would be covering introduction to OCI IAM as their capabilities. We'll introduce you to OCI IAM key concepts. We'll touch base upon authentication and authorization. We'll share some OCI IAM best practices, and we'll also talk about OCI identity governance. So without a further ado, let's get started. So let's start by discussing OCI IAM as an identity and access management enterprise solution. The key capabilities over here are inbound authentication and SSO, identity lifecycle management, outbound SSO, and then OCI IAM policies. We'll talk about each of them in a little bit of detail now. So when we talk about inbound authentication and SSO, it is nothing but how your users would be getting into the service and then try to access the services from Oracle, right? So over here, we have federated login option, wherein if you have an identity provider that is SAML or Auth 2.0 compliant, you can use those credentials and then get into OCI. We also support social logins, wherein your users can use their Google or LinkedIn credentials to get into OCI and access the services. We also support native authentication and strong MFA. If you don't have any federating partner, then yeah, OCI IAM can itself be your identity provider and give you that capability. Along with that, we have something called as adaptive security. Adaptive security is an advanced feature that would give strong authentication capabilities for your user based upon their behavior. So when activated, it can analyze users' risk profile within OCI, and then it could just give you some kind of recommendations based upon the historic behavior, like too many unsuccessful login attempts or impossible travel between the locations. And based upon that, you can just go ahead and take a decision to allow the access for the particular set of users or deny the access to the console. When we talk about identity lifecycle management, we have Active Directory Bridge. So it's a kind of a dedicated bridge. If you have your users and groups present in your on-premise Active Directory environment, you would be able to synchronize them using this AD bridge. Upon that, what happens is your users would be able to use their local AD credentials to log in into OCI. And that feature is called as delegated authentication. But what if you have any other systems where you have your identity, right, which does not support any modern standard protocol, or you have on-premise systems where you have your users and groups present? You can go ahead and use the provisioning bridge to synchronize your users and group from your on-prem to OCI IAM. And on the provisioning side, we have App Catalog. It's kind of a pre-built template applications wherein you key in some important information about your target application, and then you would be able to create your users into the target application. When we talk about outbound authentication and SSO, we support federated logins here as well. So let's say if your application talks SAML or 2.0, your application can be directly connected to OCI IAM, and you would be able to use the same set of credentials to log in into your third-party applications as well. We have dedicated features like App Gateway. We'll talk about that in a minute. And on top of that, we have OCI IAM policies. So we have dedicated section to talk about OCI IAM policies as well. But in a nutshell, it's something that would give your users the access to the resources in OCI. So let's see how OCI IAM can support single sign-on for your enterprise applications. On the left side, we have your on-premise world where you would have your enterprise applications like a business suite, JD Edwards, or PeopleSoft, which don't support modern standard protocols for single sign-on, and that's where there is a disconnect between your on-premise and on the cloud side. Upon using the dedicated features like e-business suite asserter or app gateway, you would be able to connect this kind of applications to the cloud world. So app gateway is nothing but a reverse proxy that can be used in the application which supports header-based authentication for single sign-on. And upon the connection, you would be connected to the cloud side of OCI IAM. And then you can take your flow towards your corporate identity provider with a SAML federation if you have. So in a nutshell, what happens is you will be able to log in into your company enterprise applications using your company SSO provider credentials. So how cool is that? I would like you to take again to the scenario which we talked about the global tech solution, right? They had some challenges. So the challenges was they want kind of a solution for their internal as well as external users. So we saw that the internal users would be able to use their federated accounts from their corporate identity provider, seeing the capabilities. And for the external, we do have OCI IAM as their native IAM solution, which can be backed up with strong MFA. For the set of applications that we had, they can be connected to OCIM for single sign-on, and based upon that, they would be given the access to those applications. We are modernizing the local flow, right, like to the modernized single sign-on approach. Now, we would like to discuss about the key capabilities of OCI IAM, and we'll start off by discussing the OCI identity domains. So, OCI identity domains is a self-contained identity and access management service that is used to address variety of IAM use cases. When you procure a tenancy, you would be given a default domain, which would reside in the home region of your tenancy. And then this domain would have an administrators group. So when you assign any user to this administrators group, the administrator would have the access to the entire tenancy, to all the services. So when you have different sets of users like internal or external, you can just go ahead and create multiple domains, right? And then you would be able to segregate your internal users and external users. The default domain cannot be created or it cannot be deleted because that stays with the tenancy. It comes with the tenancy and it will go with the tenancy. But then for the other domains, you can just go ahead, create multiple secondary domains, and then you can just segregate your user population based upon your needs. You can also select what would be the home region for your secondary domains, as in if you are trying to do a use case about the disaster recovery. So you can put your identity domain into some another location from what your default domain is into. The default domain will always stay on the login screen. You cannot hide it from the login screen. But for your secondary domains, you can just hide them from the login screen. The replication of this is like your default domain is automatically replicated. Your user population will be replicated to all the other subscribed regions. But then for your secondary domain, you can choose which subscribed regions that you would like to just go ahead and replicate your users to. The another building block of OCI IAM is users and groups. So let's talk about that in a minute. With respect to OCI, we have three different sets of users or user kind. So the first one would be federated domain users, which is nothing but the majority of your human population that would be logging in into the console and then try to access the services that they have access to. The second is the instance and resource principle. So instances are new identity type in IAM. Now what happens is instances having its own identity can be clubbed together as a group, and then you can grant them the access to OCI IAM services. So no more storing your user credentials on virtual host and rotating them. The third is the local domain users, aka your break class users. So we would not want you to have any kind of a security nightmare where you'll just not able to log in into console if your federation provider goes down. So we recommend having a local break class user wherein it would be local to OCI identity domain. You would have that backed up with a strong MFA. And then in a situation like this, or where it is at most important to use a break glass user, you would just go ahead and use this user account. Ideally, the break glass user should be close to zero, but then you can just go ahead and create those according to your organization standards. Let's talk about groups. Again, with OCI, we have two different types of groups. A static user group, it's general group wherein you club together same sets of user and then grant them the access privilege that they are supposed to have. The concept that we want to focus on is the dynamic groups. So dynamic group allows you to group OCI compute instances, OCI functions, or other services as principal actors. And then you can just tie them together with a matching rule and then assign them the policies to access other OCI services. So how cool is that? When we talk about user provisioning to identity domains, we have two different types. One can be via SCIM APIs, wherein we have template applications for most of the well-known identity providers out in the market. So we have one for Azure AD, Okta, one login or SailPoint. So those are template applications. Just key in some necessary information, then you would be able to synchronize your users and groups from your identity store to OCI IAM. You can use custom code as well, or any another SCIM compliant identity store would be able to just go ahead and create users and groups to OCI IAM. What if you don't have that? You can do a manual or a custom load. You can use the CSV template file. You can add your users and groups to that file and then just go ahead and upload that to OCI IAM. The tools we already discussed. We discussed about AD Bridge and we discussed about provisioning bridge. When we talk about identity and lifecycle management, we have two flavors to it. One is the just-in-time provisioning versus the SCIM provisioning. Generally, the customers ask which is preferred and what are the use cases when you go for JIT versus when you go with SCIM. So we'll try to break this down today. So the recommendation says when you want kind of a little bit of the uh, kind of schema, limited schema, and then you want to have the limited kind of lifecycle management capabilities on the sets of users, you would go with just-in-time provisioning. So what happens in JIT is the user gets created on the fly. If the user is not present on the identity domain, the identity domain would just go ahead and create that user, and then the user would be able to log in into the target application or the OCI console. This scenario is mostly preferred when you have your users not logging in every day. I would say it could be your external users, which just logs in, I would say once in a week or something like that to just go ahead and have an access to the resources. But then when you want to have a kind of a better control on the schema management and you would like to have a full life cycle management of on the users, you would go with SCIM because SCIM is pre-provisioned. What happens in SCIM is your identity provider would send this information about the user even before the user tries to access the OCI console. It would be created and then the user would reside into OCI IAM as well before they actually go ahead and try to access the resources. So in a nutshell, for the internal users, SCIM would be the recommended approach. But for your external set of users, vendors, we would say just in time would be the recommended solution. Let's talk about authentication for a minute. Authentication again comes with two flavors, like you would like to have the API access or you do a console access. So let's say if you want to access OCI IAM APIs, you would like to use them in your Terraform code or something like that, you can just go ahead, create your key pair, like a public key, private key, based upon your user capabilities, and then use that public key, private key pair to access the APIs. Or if you would like to just go ahead and authenticate yourself to OCI container registry, you can generate an auth token and you would be able to authenticate with your auth token to OCI container registry. For the console, we discussed we have native username, password, or local IAM capabilities. But if you have a federated login, you can just use your federated credentials as well to get into the console. MFA, it's mandatory if you're not having MFA on your identity provider. We would recommend OCI IAM's MFA should be kept on, and then it should be always kept on for your high privilege accounts on OCI IAM side. Let's talk about another building block, which is compartments. Compartments in OCI is logical container that organizes and isolates your resources for better access control. What does this mean? So you can have a network compartment for your network related resources versus you can have a database compartment for your database related components. Compartments are logical, right? So this is not physically going ahead and dividing your tenancy into pieces. It's logical. And it's not that once you place your resource in one compartment, it cannot be moved to another compartment. The resources can be just moved within the compartments or between the compartments as well. The compartments are hierarchical. You can just go ahead and create multiple child compartments in a parent compartment. Your tenancy starts with the root compartment, and then you can just go ahead as and when required, create the compartments as per your organization. The fun fact or why should we have a good compartment structure is it gives a better access management and also gives you cost management as well. How do you like tie that to cost management, right? So let's say if you have a budget of a monthly spend of $1,000. So let's say you started your month and then within 10, 15 days, you see that your budget is already consuming or you've already consumed $400 to $500 and you would like to just go ahead and check which service is consuming the amount, right? So if you have a good compartment structure, you're just able to filter it out and then check what are the resources that based upon its compartment consuming a lot of dollar, right? So upon that, you will be able to just go ahead and take the necessary actions, bring down some of the instances that are not required or something like that. So that would give you a good understanding and good organizational benefit as well. When we talk about best practices for compartment architecture, we have something called as core landing zone. So this is nothing but a Terraform-based automation, wherein you can run this Terraform script in OCI IAM with the resource manager. You can just key in the information, what are the things that you want that it should create for you, and then just go ahead and skip the others. Upon successful execution, it will just give you this particular architecture that you see on the screen. Just go ahead and create network compartments, security compartments, and all those different compartments for you. It will also create IAM groups. It will also create administrator groups for this compartments. So now you as an administrator should just go ahead and assign your network infrastructure guys to your network group versus the security admins to your security group. And then they'll have the access to all the network related components. So it will just go ahead, create all those policies, IAM groups, and everything for you. And you as an administrator now have to just go ahead and assign your users to the specific group. It will also go ahead and enable some services, which is on the security posture management side, which will give you some good details and insights about is your tenancy, there are any misconfigurations in your tenancy, it will just highlight them and then you can just go ahead and take necessary actions on that as well. Now let's talk about authorization. In OCI, authorization is based upon policies, and we follow closed world model, wherein unless and until you assign specifically a group of users any access to services, they would not have the access to those services. So policy language, again, it's plain English. It's not any kind of fancy syntaxes or something like big statements that you need to write. It's very simple. And then you can see an example of a policy syntax just here. So as we said, it's just allowing specifically some group. Will let the policy know from which domain this group is from. And then there's something called as verb. We'll talk about this verb in a minute, where it's nothing but what level of access is that you're planning to give it to the group of individuals. And then what is the resource type? Resource type, again, it's nothing but OCI service that it is giving the access to. And then we are scoping it to a compartment level, or you can give it to a tenancy level based upon what you have or what you like to give it. Again, the recommendation is you scope it to a compartment level so that you don't have any high privileged accounts hanging, or you don't follow the least privilege model, right? So scoping it to a compartment level is always beneficial and always recommended. We have something called as common policies linked here. So it's a public documentation that talks about some common use cases which customer would want to create the policies about, right? So it has bunch of examples. You can just go ahead, look into the documentation. If your use case is within or drafted within that, you can just go ahead, pick your policy statements from there, and you can use those statements. You have to just update the group name to what it's for you, and then you have to update your compartment where you have to scope it out. So now what say if you don't have, or if you don't want to know this policy syntax, or if you're trying this policy statements for the first time, and then you don't have the exposure to create policies, then there is something called as policy builder that would help you create these policies. It's kind of a tool wherein we have policy use cases defined here. You can just drop it down, select your use case, and then let policy builder know what is the identity domain, what is the group that you're trying to give the access to, and what is the location or the compartment level that you're trying to scope it out. So based upon this inputs that you put in here, it will just go ahead and create the policy statements for you. So you need not remember the policy syntax. How cool is that, right? Now let's just take an example of a policy syntax and break this down, try to understand what each and everything that was defined in the syntax means, right? We have an example which says allow group DB backup project to manage object family in compartment project A, and then it says where condition. Let's park this where condition for a minute. So there was something called as verb on the syntax, right? So verb is nothing but what level of access you're trying to give to this group of users, inspect being the lowest and manage being the highest, right? There is something called as resource type, which was there on the syntax. We have object family over here. So it's nothing but an aggregated resource type. In OCI, we have aggregated resource types and we have individual resource types. So if you have to just go ahead and assign the user's very fine grained level of access, you would do it on an individual resource type. So in that case, the example would say manage only the buckets in compartment. So what we're doing is we are only restricting the access to buckets and not giving the access to objects. But if you have to do it on the family, right? So there are different families that are available. You can do it on a database family, instance family according to your needs. And then you can just also go ahead and do it on the individual resource type. An important characteristics about policies is policies are hierarchical. So basically, if you're assigning a policy on a parent compartment, those policies will also apply to the child compartments as well. So if you are moving your resources from one compartment to another, policies would stay there. So be careful. You need to have the policies created or adjusted according to the new location where you're planning to move the resource to. If this is not done, there can be a scenario where you lose the access to your resources, right? Now we'll talk about the where clause. What if I have to go one level deep, not do the individual resource type, even go further into defining the access, right, or the policies? I have a where clause. Where is nothing but an condition, so it can be a Boolean condition which can be equal to, not equal to. We have and or. So this is nothing but a logical and or any. So you can just go ahead and use all for multiple conditions that you would like to put. I can put any for either of the conditions, right? We'll see that in a minute with an example. Or you can just go ahead and define it to a specific resource. I can also do it on a specific permission, like create, update, delete. There's something called as tags as well. So you can tag your resources and then write the conditions based upon tags as well. Let's just break this down with an example. Now, we have a statement which says allow dynamic group, compute and Christopher Johnson to manage objects in compartment, Chris Johnson. So if I see the statement till here, it says I have a managed privilege on objects on the entire compartment, right? So this is kind of a wide policy and wide access. Now using where clause, we'll just go ahead and see how we are just going ahead and scoping it out to a restricted kind of an access, right? The policy evaluation will start from the innermost braces. Here we have an identifier says any. So I'm just going ahead and putting some condition which says request.permission, and that permission is create or inspect. So I'm just giving only create and inspect permission, not giving an update or delete permission the access to. So let's say if I'm just going ahead and creating an object, then this policy statement becomes true and I'll be able to move ahead. When I come out of this, there is a target bucket name which is also given. Now, what it means is I am just allowing object to create and inspect on a specific bucket. If there has been any bucket that I'm trying to just go ahead and create an object to, this statement would not be correct, right? And then it would just deny me the access. But if I'm just going ahead trying to create an object or inspect an object in this log bucket, only then this where condition satisfies, and only then I'm having a managed privilege on those objects. So this is how you would just be able to use a where clause, and then you would be able to just go ahead and restrict the access to the very fine grained level. Now, what if the use cases that you have does not fit in into either the individual resource type or the where condition? What's the option, right? There's something called as tagging. In OCI, we have two different types of tags. There are fee from tags, which is nothing but a key value pair. You'll be able to just create a key definition and just add a value. You attach it to any kind of resource, and then you use it in your policy syntax. And then you'll be able to give the access to those resources. The second types is the defined tags. It's more kind of restrictive in a way in which what would be a key definition, what would the values that you assign. So defined tags would be more kind of restrictive in a way that you don't go ahead and misconfigure stuffs, right? In the free form tag, you have the capability to just go ahead and type whatever the key value that you have. But as an organization standard, you would just go ahead and create the tag definition, and then you would also create the tag values. So whenever any kind of an administrator is going ahead and assigning those tags to your resources, he would have a list to select from, and then based upon that, he would just go ahead and pick up the necessary value that he would add to the resources. Let's just talk about the defined tags and how this can be used. Yeah. So with defined tags, we have something called as tag namespace. So it's a container where you would have your tag definitions, tag keys, and then it would be able to just go ahead and assign those tag definitions to your resources. Let's take an example. We have definition called as operations, and then we are just going ahead and creating a key definition known as environment, right? Now, what would be my tag in this case? It would be operations.environment, and then there is a value. So this value could be predefined like production, dev, UAT, or you can just go ahead and type this value. So as a best practice, we recommend you have these values as well in place, and then the administrators would just go ahead and pick up the necessary value that needs to be addressed or that needs to be added to the resources. The tag namespace, this cannot be deleted. So once they're created, you can retire them, and then it will not allow you to add the same tag key definitions to any another resources. But if you want to just reuse them, you can just go ahead and reactivate it, and then you can again use those tag definitions, and you can assign them to the OCI resources. A caution while using tag-based access control is we would want an administrator group that has access to defining these tags and assigning it to the administrators, assigning it to the resources. So basically, it should not be like everyone having this access. Otherwise, they can just go ahead and modify the tags, right? So it should be a limited set of individuals that go ahead, create the tag definitions, and then assign your resources with the proper tags. Let's talk about OCI IAM best practices for a minute. So we want you to create a security model, which is kind of an environment where you have your tags, your compartments, your resources created in a way that you would be able to just go ahead and manage them. And it should be like you're adding the resources in proper compartments, and you're adding necessary tags if at all that is required. We want you to enforce least privilege model, wherein any key individual at any point in time should not have any elevated access or any kind of access that the person is not supposed to have. We would recommend not using OCI default administrator group or an administrator group after your initial setup is done. So as and when required, you can just go ahead and create another groups, and then you can add your users to those groups, and then those groups would be able to have the necessary privileges, right, based upon the policies. We can just leverage situational permissions as well. So this is something like if you know your end users would be logging into console from a specific network parameter, can add that like only this network parameter IP addresses should be allowed to get in into the console and then deny the others. Or can do it on kind of a time basis, like I want to allow the access to the console from Monday to Friday, that are weekdays, but then don't allow users getting it into console on weekends, that is Saturdays and Sundays. Use instance principles and dynamic groups if you want to do a machine to machine kind of an access, and use OCI services. Enforce multi-factor authentication and adaptive security wherever that is possible. If you're doing it on your identity provider side, it's okay. But if it's not on the identity provider, we highly recommend having multi-factor authentication turned on onto OCI IAM. So that could be for all your privileged accounts and also for your normal users. You can use different identity domains for your different user populations. You can just go ahead, create secondary domains for, let's say, environment specific, like it could be dev, test, prod, or you can just have your internal versus external users into different domains. We have white paper articles which are published, which talks about OCI IAM best practices. What are the recommendations from OCI IAM side, right? With respect to identity and access management, we would recommend you to have a read through that, and then it covers all those use cases of break glass users and all those things that we discussed today, right? With that, I have a short demo. I'll just go over to the console, walk you through OCIM key capabilities, and then show you a small use case based upon policies and how policies could be able to restrict the access. So my account is an administrator account. My session was active and I was able to get into the console. Let me go to my user account and I'll show you some key capabilities or things that we discussed, right? So I am a member of an administrators group and also the security team. Then I have all this user capabilities like creating an access token or an API key. So all these key capabilities can be just as and when required, you can just enable and disable for all your set of users. And then you should have only the access capabilities to the services or the key capabilities over here, right? The user capabilities based upon the necessary, based upon what is necessary. I'll walk you through the policies that I've created. So basically we have created two groups, Team A and Team B, and for them we have written the set of policies. So what this policy statement says is I'm allowing the Team A group to have the access to instance family on a specific compartment, right? This is something that I would like you to just have a highlight on, wherein I'm just defining the tree structure. So the team A compartment is under my Chetan Soni compartment, and then that compartment is again under security. So when you're defining policies, we would like you to define it at the child level so that the inheritance property does not come in, right? So if I go ahead and apply the same policy on security, then everything within that would have this capability, and that would defeat the purpose. I'll just go ahead and show you the groups as well that I've created. So go into the domains. So over here we have two groups, team A and team B. And the multi-factor authentication would be like if I'm logging in, right, as an administrator or any user, I would just go ahead and would be able to go ahead and set my MFA from the security tab. You can just go ahead, select whatever the options that my administrator has kept enabled for, and then pick and choose my factor and then enroll it. Now what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and log out from my user and I'll just log in as a user that is from team B. So it's asking me to pick up my domain. And now I'm logged in as a test user. I'll just go ahead and try to access the service that I have access to, right? That is computer instances in my compartment. So as you can see, since I was on my root compartment, it does not allow me to view the resources. But when I go ahead and pick up my compartment, I would be able to see the instances that are there in this compartment, since I have the access to this particular compartment, right, as a test user. Let me just go ahead and select the other compartment, which is team B. And here again, it says that I don't have the access. It's not only the compartments in the same service, is also for other services as well. So if I go ahead and try to launch an autonomous database, it will just go ahead and say I don't have the access, not only into any another compartment, but also to the compartment that I belong to. It will say that the access is forbidden and I cannot go ahead and just create the service. I'll just log out of this user and we'll go to the presentation again. So I will have Kiran to talk about OCI access governance. Kiran, over to you.
Thank you, Chetan, for the great session. Identity security has two parts to it. The first one is access management that covers authentication, authorization, and single sign-on. And the second one is identity governance or access governance. That talks about, or that includes user lifecycle management and user access certification. Chetan talked about access management part of identity security. I will talk about identity governance or access governance. As I said, that includes user lifecycle management and user access certification. When we talk about user lifecycle management, it starts with how does the user born into the system. You can directly create users in access governance system, or you can synchronize users from your HR system. If you're using PeopleSoft or Oracle Fusion HR as your HR system, you can synchronize users from there to access governance systems. It supports integration with any directories, including Active Directory as well. So you can synchronize users from those systems to Oracle Access Governance, and it supports integration with Oracle Identity Manager and OCI IAM, the service that Chetan talked about. So you can synchronize and bring all of those users into access governance systems so that you can govern those users. Once users are synchronized to access governance system, the next step typically includes giving access to the systems that all users have access to. For example, your email system, your Slack, everyone should get a Zoom account. All of those access provisionings or all of those entitlements are called birthright entitlements or birthright access. You can create and configure that in Access Governance product. The systems that you're provisioning those users and access to are called target systems, and Access Governance system supports integration with those target systems to provision them immediately, or sort of as soon as those users are created in Access Governance systems, or as soon as those users are synchronized from the source to Access Governance system. The next step, once birthright provisioning is done, is to do some provisioning based on some roles, some policies. For example, if user is a member of finance team, then user should get access to all of the finance applications. If user is a member of, let's say, IT support organization or DevOps organization, then user should get access to the Jira system. Similarly, any role provisioning, any access provisioning that has to happen based on some attribute of the user profile. That attribute can be the organization that the user belongs to, or that attribute can be the group that user is a member of. Based on those attributes, you can create what is called as provisioning rules or provisioning policies to, again, provision those users along with their access to those target systems. The one step ahead of that is, there are some systems that should be accessible only to sort of, targeted individuals, let's say, only after approval or whatnot. There comes the access request-based provisioning. Access governance systems does support access request workflow. So you can, design those workflows, and as and when your users need access to those sort of selected systems that support provisioning through access request provisioning, will basically users will request access through the system, and then the access will be provisioned. What if you do not want sort of automated provisioning to those targets? Otherwise, any user would request access to any system and they'll be granted sort of immediately, right? So you need an approval process in between. Access governance system does support approvals as well. So when you create the workflow, the access request workflow, you can designate some approvers. You can say, the application owner is the approver, the user manager is the approver. You can also, define 4 or 5 different sort of roles as approvers and say any 2 from this 5 or any 3 from this 5 has to approve, but that 3 must include users manager. So users manager has to approve for sure, but any 2 from the remaining 4 can approve the request, and then the access will be provisioned. So it supports all of those different, permutations and combinations when it comes to approval management and, provisioning based on those approvals. Once all of this is set up, you would also want the system to deprovision user, as in when, user role changes, if the provisioning was done based on role, as in when user is removed from the organization, if the provisioning was done based on, birthright provisioning workflow. Well, if the user is terminated, all access should be revoked, but that in particular. And then if the request or access was provisioned based on, again, access request, when the condition of that, provisioning changes, you want to revoke that access. So deprovisioning is also supported by access governance system. But beyond that, for compliance reasons, especially in healthcare and finance industry, they are mandated by compliance to run what is called as identity or access certification cycles. Access governance system does support running those certification cycles or certification campaigns. So you create certification campaign for a given application or for a group of application, or again for a given user or for a group of users, and you define who are the reviewers for those access review cycles. As and when those reviewers view those, as and when the review campaign is run, reviewers will get an email, and when they log into access governance system, they will see a request to approve or reject. If they approve, then the access remains as is. If they reject, then the access is revoked automatically. So that is also supported. And the last one is auditing and reporting. So any access that is granted or provisioned by access governance system is audited. Any changes that is made in the policy is also sort of logged in the audit logs, and you can run reports as well through access governance systems on a periodic basis to again meet your compliance, auditing, and reporting requirements. Imagine you have to give a specific permission or provision a specific access to hundreds of users. That will take a lot of time and will be error-prone exercise. So access governance introduces two new concepts with this service or with this product: identity collection and access bundles. So you can create logical grouping of identities. And the reason I say logical is because these are not your groups in OCI IAM systems, or these are not your groups in your HR system like PeopleSoft or Oracle Fusion HR. These are logical collections of identities that you create in access governance system. And then you do bulk sort of provisioning, deprovisioning to different target systems using these identity collections. Similarly, if you have to give even one user or 5 users access to 100 different systems, it will take a lot of time. So you can create access bundles as well. Access bundle is basically, again, a logical grouping of targets to which you can provision or deprovision users, whether it is birthright provisioning or policy-based provisioning, doesn't matter. You can use those access bundles and identity collections throughout the system to create your provisioning, deprovisioning processes, including workflows and certification cycles. So that's all I had to cover from access governance system. These are some resources that you can refer to. First one is dr.oracle.com documentation about Oracle Access Governance Service. The next one is pricing on the service, and we have some cool blogs, articles, documents where we cover some interesting use cases that we have done for other customers to sort of help you in your journey of implementing access governance product. That's it from me. Stan, over to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Karen and Chetan, for an awesome session. We really appreciate your time and help on these sessions. I hope it was a good learning experience for everyone. With that, thanks for joining today's session and have a wonderful day.